Why does Wotan, as the Wanderer, go visit Mime? Just a tiny bit of background. We know from the text that Wotan has avoided this part of the world carefully. Indeed, when Brunhilde is looking for a place for Sieglinde to hide, she says she should go to the forest in the east. And her sisters say, oh, but that's a terribly dangerous place. That's a dark and evil place. That's where Fafner sits on the hoard. And Brunhilde says, yes, but that's one place where Daddy will never go. He stays away from there. He shuns it. Of course, he wants to stay away from Fafner. And why does he want to stay? Why does, in general, Wotan stay away from Fafner? It's pretty easy, really. Yeah?
Because if he tries to recapture
the ring
and so forth, then he will have undone everything.
That's right. That's right. He can't, he has, the nature of his legal system is that when he's made a legal agreement, he can't undo it, and the whole power of his spear rests upon that. So he stays away from Fafner. I guess maybe just the temptation. He has Fafner, and he's just too strong, can't stand it, and so he goes after him. Anyway, so he does, we know he avoids that. And yet never, even though, so all these generations now, he's avoided it, and now all of a sudden, Wotan shows up in the guise as the Wanderer at Mime's doorstep for his visit and the subsequent riddle game. So why? Why does Wotan go? Yes?
Well, because I think for him to be able to recuperate the ring has to be someone else that gets it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, it's only Siegfried with the sword.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they make the sword back, it won't happen. So he has to want the Mime that they need to make that sword so he can kill.
Right. I mean, Mime already knows, of course. And one of the interesting things about Mime, one of the interesting things about many of the characters in The Ring, is how much they know. And we don't know sometimes how they know these things. There have been productions that have tried to explain to us in sort of graphically why they know. The most noticeable in my experience of that was Dorst. Is that his name? The previous Bayreuth. Yeah. Who has Mime escape from Nibelheim with Wotan and Loge way back in scene 3 of Rheingold, and he goes around following people around, hiding and looking and taking notes and putting it down on his computer, naturally on his computer, because this is what all the mod new productions would have. And so he knows about these things because he's been following around. One of the things that we find out very much about Mime, for instance, in his conversation with Wotan, is he knows everything there is to know about Siegfried, Siegmund, Sieglinde, their background, their relationship to Wotan, all these things. He hasn't told Siegfried any of it, and when Siegfried essentially throttles him until he does, he tells Siegfried only so much as he can. Remember, when Siegfried says, "What was my mother's name?" he says, "I never knew it." And he says, she must have, Sieglinde mochte sie heißen. She may have been called Sieglinde. And then Siegfried says, "What was my father's name?" And that he says, "I have no idea. I never knew him. Actually, he doesn't say I have no idea. He says, I never saw him. That he died in battle is all I know." And then, of course, 10 minutes later, he rattles off to Wotan everything there is to know about Siegmund and Sieglinde with their names and their whole life's history. So, I mean, he doesn't... Why, by the way, just as a question here on the side, why do you think Mime does not want to tell... part of the typical fairy tale hero thing, of course, is that the hero doesn't know about his royal past. Why does Mime so carefully not tell Siegfried? Yes?
They want Siegfried to feel dependent upon him.
Yeah.
He is Siegfried's only path.
Sure.
What did he say?
He wants Siegfried to feel dependent on him, and that he feels that Siegfried is his only past. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. He's very worried. As a matter of fact, when he finally is forced to tell Siegfried about Nothung and about his mother and what he does tell him about his father, which isn't much, he's especially worried. And Mime is worried when the curtain rises. He's worried because he has this basic dilemma, which is he knows. Why he knows or how he knows, I guess it's just because he knows the story, that only Nothung is going to kill the dragon. Notung has sort of been specially made to kill this dragon, which is literally true. But that he can't reforge Notung. That Notung's steel simply escapes him. He can't do anything with it. And then, after the scene when Siegfried finds out about his past, in other words, when the state he's in, when the Wanderer shows up on the scene, he's even in worse shape because now Siegfried knows about the sword and is particularly eager for it. And so not only does Siegfried want a sword, so he has to figure out a way to forge it, but Siegfried's going to run away when he gets it. So that's the whole point of the sword, is to get Siegfried to kill the dragon with it, yes?
But it's also after Wotan's visit that he thinks, oh my God, I didn't teach him fear.
But this is before Wotan's visit. Yeah. This is before Wotan's visit, though.
Right, they inform him that the stuff is before, but then after Wotan.
Yes.
He goes into more details, because Siegfried has wanted the sword to run off, but he afterwards then goes into the objective.
That's right. Sure, that occurs. You're ahead of me here. That's after. I'm just setting up the scenario for Wotan's visit. So this is as it is at Wotan's visit. So why does Wotan visit? There are big consequences of this visit, but why does Wotan go visit? I mean, Mime. Yes.
Number one, to check up on Siegfried because he knows that he's entering adulthood at about the point.
To check up on Siegfried because he knows he's in. I'm just repeating you because not everyone here can hear you.
In fact, through Mime, he gives Siegfried the forge.
Okay, he says through Mime, he gives Siegfried the clue to which he needs to forge Notung. Anybody else? Any? Yes?
I think it's similar to that, but it's more direct. Wotan needs the sword reforged. Mime is completely flabbergasted and can't figure out how to do that. So Wotan needs to get Mime past that.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're both right, but I think that's basically things are at an impasse, and Wotan's visit is a way to break the impasse. And the way it breaks the impasse is, I don't know if Wotan can actually predict exactly how it's going to break the impasse because he doesn't know exactly the outcome. Wotan is taking, by the way, an enormous chance in this whole encounter. What if Mime had indeed asked the right questions? What if Mime had indeed said, okay, question number one, who's going to forge the sword? Question number two, once he's forged the sword, how can I get him to kill the dragon for me? Question number three, after he's killed the dragon, how can I get the ring for... Those are the questions he should have asked. Yeah, that's right. Wotan understands Mime's personality pretty well. He knows he'll never ask anything he doesn't know. That Mime sees the contest as a way to show off his own knowledge, not to gain new knowledge, which is actually not only very astute, but also, I think, a source of comedy. It's a typical comic kind of situation when you have people doing what they shouldn't do in a rather foolish way. But what the effect of what happens is the first thing, yes, Wotan does sort of catch up on Siegfried. I've always thought that Wotan, being who he is, probably could have ways to know what's going on with Siegfried without actually showing up and visiting and confronting Mime. But see, first thing, he plants in Mime this very important business about only he who, he emphasizes it over and over again, only he who doesn't know fear can forge the sword. And the idea that Siegfried has to be the one to forge the sword himself, I think that Mime has taken for granted that since he's the great smith, he made the Tarnhelm, he's the one who should forge the sword. The important point of this thing is to it's actually Siegfried who has to forge the sword. And by implanting it into Mime, he ends up getting it into Siegfried too. So that's anybody else have any further on this one? Okay, because and of course it works. It works. At least up to a point. Okay, here's the second one is a little trickier, and one that I feel that has a slightly shakier answer. Why does Wotan go visit Alberich? Beginning of the second act, we have that scene between Wotan and Alberich. I point out that if Wotan has avoided this part of the world in general, this is the one place he really would have avoided, you'd think. Because in the scene with Alberich, he's going right to the Fafner's lair, and he indeed actually wakes up Fafner. So why does Wotan visit Alberich? Is it in order to wake up Fafner?
No.
Yeah. Yes? Let's have you first.
I think grammatically it's very important because the last contact Wotan has with Alberich is when he's still working with him, and there will be no more confrontation.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat your answer so everybody can hear that this dramatically necessary, because this is the last time we saw Wotan and Alberich together, and Wotan and Alberich are, after all, the two main adversaries of the ring, at least the old part of the ring. And the great polar symbols and the conflict between whom the whole action basically rides. And we haven't seen them since the curse, and this is a way to have a final confrontation between the two, sort of midway through the ring, as it were. Anybody else? Yes? Okay, in other words, it has to do with fleshing out the characterization of Wotan and showing us the more dynamics in the two relationships. I'm not dismissing your answers, I'm just going to make a general comment on all of them. Yes?
Doesn't he want to roil the relationship between the two brothers also?
In order to roil the relationship between the two brothers, in other words, the purpose of the scene would be to inform Alberich that Mime is coming with Siegfried and Mime intends to take the ring. That, by the way, is a good answer. Yes? Anybody? They're all good answers so far, by the way. Okay.
To inform him and to create.
Yeah, to create more, as she said, to roil, to create conflict and turmoil. To me, almost, in this particular case, this is a scene in the ring which used to be cut a lot, and which actually could be cut. There's unlike, I don't think there is any scene in the ring that doesn't contain material that we need to know. And that certainly includes this scene. But actually, there's perhaps less essential material in this scene that we need to know. That being said, I think it's an absolutely essential scene. And the primary reason it's an essential scene, it was your comment. I think it's absolutely essential. These are the two great adversaries in the ring. They represent these two basic, and especially in the light of the fact that Wotan now seems to have recognized this situation, that he is light Alberich. He's defined himself as light Alberich to Mime in Act 1. And having that light Alberich and the dark Alberich together in one last confrontation. Also, from my standpoint as a musician, it's very important because we hear in this scene a shadow of all this music that we have not heard and will not hear again in many cases, that we associate with Alberich and Alberich's rage, his revenge, his hateful, lust for power, etc. We actually, in very short time, we get a whole sort of replay of both Alberich's, the two big outbursts. Alberich has two big outbursts in Rheingold. The first one is in the Nibelheim scene, in scene 3, when he bursts out, when he gives his vision of the world to Wotan and Loge. When he says, because I was rejected love and was forced to curse it, all love will be banished from the earth. And everybody will live in a world of hate and violence. And it builds to a huge climax. And we have an exact recap. The exact same music is played, slightly condensed in this scene with Wotan. When he basically says the same thing, he says, "I'll see you guys all be destroyed, and I'm going to win." And we have the exact. And then we also have a recap before. The order is reversed now, but that makes sense. Of the music of his extraordinary rage before he curses the ring, and indeed the music of the curse is all through this act. Act 2 of Siegfried is just replete with the music of the curse, and so all this music of his rage comes back to particularly difficult viola licks, actually. Just as an aside. So I do think that it's a very important scene because it gives us a chance to awakens our consciousness of Alberich. Just Act 1, actually. All of Act 1 of Siegfried has reawakened us as listeners to much of the music of Rheingold. The overwhelming majority of the music of Walküre, with just little snippets of exceptions, mostly in Wotan's monologue, is really almost entirely new music. A lot of it's based on stuff we heard at Rheingold, but it's really new music. It's music of a different sort, of a different character, of different content. And the world of Rheingold music, except for little snippets like the Valhalla motive coming in, or an occasional ring, or an occasional spear motive, is really not so present. Now, in Act 1 of Siegfried, it's very present, although with all this ring music and all this music associated with Mime, and also, for that matter, all the forging music, since the Nibelheim's the Nibelheim scene was complete with the forging. Remember, we hear the actual forges by themselves, both going down and coming back up from Nibelheim, and with their characteristic, the yam, all that rhythm, which we hear so much in Act 1 of Siegfried, it all comes back to Rheingold. And in many respects, Siegfried, the first two acts of Siegfried, in any case, actually remind us, bring back to life the sound world of Rheingold. All the kind of music that we heard in Rheingold. And this is essential to Wagner's whole concept of the ring as this construction, where he's constantly, as I said, he's basically trying to create a huge time expanse, all of it with a great deal of volume, with this very replete with a past, and very replete also with a potential future. So he brings back this music, and by having a scene that together with Wotan and Alberich is a perfect way to do that. So to me, that might be the primary reason for the scene, yeah?
The music that they call the renunciation or the great decision, moment of decision, you have it in Rheingold and Siegfried sings it to Sieglinde. Is that, did I miss it? Is that?
It doesn't occur in Siegfried.
But it comes back and goes down the
Once.
Where? What?
Do you want me to answer that now, or do you want to wait till Götterdämmerung?
But it doesn't come back.
No, the music that the Rhine, that I always forget whether it's Voglinde or Velgunda who sings, she means this. Very unmistakable tune. Nur wer die Minne macht. That very momentous and easily recognizable motif that from when they first say, only he who forges, only he who curses love, only he who renounces love will have the power to turn the gold into this ring. And then, of course, we get several recurrences of it in Rheingold, always referring to Alberich doing it. Alberich himself sort of sings fragments of it. We have a very complete version of it in the same key with some very other features the same that I'm not going to go into because it anticipates one of my extra questions now. In Walküre, in a very surprising pace, which has been discussed a great deal by many people, probably the single most controversial place in the ring as far as musicians are concerned, when Siegmund is just going to pull Noten from the tree, he sings the whole thing all over again. It seems like, at first blush at least, like a very opposite moment. We have it then when Wotan kisses Brunhilde asleep. Different key and different this time, but it's still exactly. So küsst die Gottheit so küsse ich die Gottheit von dir. So I kiss your Godhead away to that music, which makes sense. But we don't hear it at all in Siegfried, not at all. We do hear it once in Götterdämmerung, only once though. We'll wait till Götterdämmerung. So let's recap the reasons for visiting Alberich. A chance to bring the music back. It definitely, the fact that it reminds Alberich of Mime. And I have no idea, no reason to assume that Alberich was even aware that Mime was still on the scene. It's always unwise to underestimate what these people know. But nevertheless, they seem to know a tremendous amount. But this is myth after all. But nevertheless, I think it's very important for Wotan to set Mime and Alberich up against each other. For one thing, I think everything that will roil the situation, that will have as an end prodding Siegfried on to action, is a good thing for him. And also, it's less likely that either Alberich or Mime will somehow succeed in getting the ring from Siegfried, which of course is the very thing that Wotan fears the most, if they're fighting each other. Obviously, that's good tactics in every war. Get your enemies to fight each other first.
Question.
Yeah.
How long has Alberich been there?
That's a good question. How long has Alberich been there? I don't know, but my feeling is, by the atmosphere when he's there, yes, Simon?
I think he's been there ever since Fafner.
Yeah, so do I. That's my feeling too. I think that as soon as Fafner turns himself into a dragon and sets up shop there and just sits there, that Alberich has been outside his cave. I feel like that, so we know that it's been, how long has that been? Well, it's been 100 years. I mean, we don't know how long it's been, but it's been a damned long time. Oh, it's been longer than that.
I said at least.
Yeah, well, it's been since Fafner kills Fasolt at the end of Rheingold. And what we're told is pretty much immediately he turns himself into a dragon and goes to this place. So how much time takes place between Rheingold and Walküre is minimally not only the time to have Siegmund and Sieglinde born, but much, much, much more than that, because all the Valkyries are born. Valhalla has been peopled by dead heroes. I think it would be easy to say that there have been centuries or millennia. There's been an extremely long time. And then between Walküre and Siegfried, there has been one generation. There's been time for Siegfried to grow up. That's a much more finite amount of time. Yes?
Remember, he must have taken some time off, I'm talking about Alberich, to seduce the English.
That's a very good point. That's right. And he's already done that. We know that's a good point. He has done something else, because I forgot her name. I always forget it. Gurhild, or no, what's her name? Grimhild. He has seduced a good woman of good society, with money, and had Hagen. So that's something he has done. So anyway, I think we agree there's kind of a lot of reasons why Wotan visits Alberich. Yeah? Oh, there is no one. That's clear. Nibelheim is fallen into sort of anarchy and despair. Sort of nothing, because he no longer has the ring, so he has in no way to rule Nibelheim. So Nibelheim has not gone back to some of sort of its Arcadian peaceful. Interesting. This is I'm saying that half in jest, but actually it's not fair. In Wagner's earliest versions of the ring, certainly in Siegfried's Tod, the idea of freeing the Nibelungs, and the Nibelungs being free and independent and is absolutely central to the original concept of the ring. And we get little shadows of it in the text and some other places. But the idea is, long as the ring exists, the Nibelungs are still somehow slaves. And there's one little place we get a little notice of that in Götterdämmerung, which could be, it's from the early text, so maybe Wagner should have changed it and didn't, or maybe shouldn't have changed it. When Hagen is telling Gunther about the fact that Siegfried has got the ring, and that he killed the dragon and won the horde, and Gunther says, so Siegfried hat ihn erkämpft. So Siegfried won it in battle, and what Hagen says is, Knecht sind die Nibelungen ihm. The Nibelungs are his slaves. It's an indirect answer, but it's sort of imply that anybody who has the ring has the power, has enslaved the Nibelungs. So anyway. Okay, let's go to question 3. This is, of course, of all the people that he visits, by far the most important scene. Why does Wotan awaken Erda? And there's a little side question to this, which I sort of like. When does Erda recognize Wotan? In other words, Wotan is in disguise. He's going around as the Wanderer. When does she recognize Wotan? When does Mime recognize Wotan? When does Alberich recognize Wotan? And is there any significance in how long or how short it takes them, the various people he visits, to recognize who he really is? So yes? Alberich recognizes him immediately. Immediately, yes. Yeah. Mime? Well, Mime does, we know, okay, this is an interesting point with Mime. Now, in the production we saw, it was quite, with the Met, at the Schneider-Simpson, it seemed as if Mime had recognized him from the start of the scene. But in the text, Mime only recognizes him at the end of the third question. Part of that could be because Wotan inadvertently sets off a huge thunder and lightning display or maybe doesn't. And I don't think it's so inadvertent at all, actually, when his sword comes down. And you're right. Whatever else we may think of that production, James Morris is just unbelievably magnificent at that moment. I mean, sort of, he really is the king of the gods. And then Mime very specifically says, he says, "Gosh, I haven't seen Wotan in a long time, and my spirit quails in front of him." I mean, that's what he says. So he clearly recognizes him then.
You don't think he recognizes him early and is trying to get rid of him by asking those banal questions?
No, No, I don't think that. But I don't know if he hasn't recognized him. But I don't think that's the reason for his banal questions. I do think he wants just to get rid of him, and that I think he asks those questions just because he sees the chance of asking questions as a chance to show off his own knowledge. He's very proud of his own knowledge, and instead of trying to find
Those questions make less sense for him to ask if he's already recognized.
Yeah, I think that's true too. They make less sense that he would ask those questions. Although, once again, so what about Erda? When does she recognize? Now, of all the people, let's get one thing straight. Alberich, okay, we understand Alberich is Alberich, and he's got lots of discernment, and he immediately recognizes that this Wagner, and it's also possible that maybe Wotan makes no attempt to disguise his personality to the Wagner, to Alberich. But of the three, Erda would be, at first blush, the one who would recognize him the most immediately. After all, he's had at least one daughter by her. She was madly in love with him, clearly. I mean, she was very much in love with Wotan, which is I think, a very crucial part of the story. Now, it's true that she's been asleep for a long time, so maybe she's sort of groggy. But also, she's supposedly this all-wise woman. So does she recognize him right away? No. I think that's clear. That has to be. Because there's a very definite, distinct moment in this scene when she says, "You are not who you said you were." And then he says, "You are not what you dreamed," which is an interesting answer. I wonder why she doesn't recognize him. And by the way, it's kind of important that as a story mechanism that she not recognize him, because what she says, the law, and then how she sets it up, would not have been the same had she right from the start been speaking to Wotan, rather than speaking to some guy who has the power, the spell to wake her up, just sort of in general. In any case, I don't want to go too deep. I want to get to some of these other questions. I also will point out that I think a very major reason for this scene, perhaps even more than the one with Alberich, is the necessity of confrontation. And Siegfried is a bridge between the early ring and the late ring. The early ring is the ring of the struggle between Wotan and Alberich. The late ring is the struggle between Siegfried and Hagen, and between Brunhilde and Hagen, etc., and Siegfried, etc., etc. But the basic situation has been set up by the great figures of the old ring, of Alberich, of Wotan, and of Erda. Alberich appears symbolically, at least, in Götterdämmerung, but neither Erda, and Erda also appears in a way symbolically in Götterdämmerung via the Norns at the beginning. And Wotan also appears symbolically in Götterdämmerung in a way via Waltraute, actually, I'd say, but at least to some extent. But nevertheless, I think it's really important for Wagner to have a chance, dramatically and musically, to have us see these figures together. And it's also interesting because one question I always would love to ask, maybe I'll anticipate it, ask it now, but one of the things I love to think about in the ring is 15 hours long. It has a lot of scenes. But sometimes what's really interesting are the scenes that we don't see in the ring. The things that we know happened or we hear about obliquely, but that we do not see. There's some of them that we hear about not so obliquely. For instance, Wotan's, one of the great actions that sets up the whole ring is Wotan's tearing off a branch from the world ash tree, drinking from the wells of wisdom, and making the spear. And at which time the world ash tree starts to die and the wells of wisdom start to dry up. But at least we hear about that scene. I'd like, just in preparation for next year, think about other places. Okay, we don't ever see, until this point, Wotan and Erda together. Wotan at the end of Erda's intervention in Rheingold, Wotan says, "I got to learn more. I got to go down there and find out more." He just says that. And then, of course, we know in his monologue that he has gone down, and with the magic of love, he has gotten from Erda tons of information, some of it's very precise. For instance, that when Alberich has had a son, the end of the gods is near, for instance. He knows that very specifically. And he also gets from her, much more importantly, a pledge, he calls it, Brunhilde. In other words, who's the fruit of their love. But we never see them together until this moment. But there are think about other things that happen in the ring. Very important, crucial, necessary things that happen in the ring that we never see. There's a few that just completely stick in my mind, but let's not go there right now. Okay, let's go to the fourth question. So I think as much as anything else, Wotan visits Erda has to do with him. He's wrestling with himself. This is a scene in which he has a lot to do about Wotan's own quest and Wotan's own learning experience as much as it does about Erda itself. And then, of course, about these two great major figures coming in one last confrontation. But what about Wotan and Siegfried, the next scene? Now, after having avoided Siegfried like the plague in the rest of the ring, I mean, if there's one character that Wotan has to avoid, much more so than even Alberich, I mean, than Fafner, in a way, it's Siegfried. After all, the whole failure of Siegmund was that he was involved with it. Now, we can say to ourselves, well, you're still involved. You've set up the scenario. You know about all these things. You're prodding Mime. You're prodding Alberich. But still, he would say, well, yeah, but it's all indirect. I'm not really doing anything. I don't want to make the same mistake I made. When Brunhilde talks to him about that Siegfried is going to be born and that the remnants of Nothung have been saved, Wotan responds extremely violently at the end of Valkyria. He doesn't want to hear about this because he doesn't want to blow it this time. He doesn't want to repeat what happened with Siegmund. And yet now, at the really crucial moment, not only does he not avoid Siegfried, he seeks out an encounter with him. Why? Yeah?
I think two reasons. I think firstly, because he just can't resist going to see Siegfried. Despite how he blew it with Siegmund, he wants to see Siegfried. And secondly, I think because he is having one last attempt to interfere, but it's only a half-assed attempt, because he's already had the answer from Erda that there is nothing further that he can do.
Okay. Did everybody hear him? No. Okay. He said that he couldn't resist seeing Siegfried. You know, that even though after all, this is Siegfried is the carrier of his great idea, the indirect repository of what he probably cares most about and loves. So he can't resist seeing him one last time. And also, he's, in spite of Erda, in spite of everything, he's sort of, I guess, trying one last time to see if he can stop the rolling ball, as it were. Anybody else? Yes, there was. Yes.
I think in general what's been happening is there's been a transition of power. In this scene, the transition of power between Wotan to Siegfried, from the gods to the humans. It's the twilight of gods. And I think the scene with Erda, she also has transferred her wisdom and is fading out. And Brunhilde is a repository.
Yeah. Well, and in a way we see that there's with the Norns too. Everybody hear that? This is a transition from the old world to the new world, which is what I was basically saying. Also, when talking about with the Erda thing, the old world of the ring, the new world of the ring, that this passage of power, as it were, from the world of Wotan to the world of Siegfried. Also, with for instance, with the Norns, we see the Norns rope break, but I don't know. At the very delirium at the end of the love duet, at the end of Siegfried, one of the things that Brunhilde says is, Norns, your rope now should break. Right on a high note, a big climactic place. So, it's, in other words, the idea is that all the powers of the old world are perish, and now we have this idea of a new world. Of course, it's not quite true yet, but although the Norns' rope does break. This puts into concrete action what Wotan starts to recognize, although doesn't recognize fully, at the end of Die Valkyrie, when he says to the Siegfried motive, only he who does not fear my sword shall pass through this my spear. Sorry. Only he who does not fear my spear, nur wer meine Speerspitze fürchtet, durchschreite dies Feuer nie. He who fears my spear will never go through this fire. And in a way, this can only be truly expressed by his breaking the spear. And so I think, for instance, I personally was in no way shocked or dismayed by Wotan's breaking his own spear. I didn't think it dramatically worked terribly well the way it was done, sort of. But in a certain kind of way, it reminded me very strongly of another very famous fight in Wagner where someone actually loses on purpose. Anybody think of where this is? It's very famous. Tristan, that's right. Tristan lets Melot wound him. And there's something of this too, because Tristan at this point recognizes that only in dying that he can find the fulfillment that he seeks. Wotan does, and there's a lot of testament from Wagner's own letters. This particular scene was written about at probably greater length by Wagner in that famous letter to Rückel than any other scene in The Ring about Wotan's. But all of what you say is true. Wotan absolutely loves Siegfried and absolutely wants Siegfried to recognize him. He doesn't get the satisfaction. And in a way, of course, you could say on a very deep level, Wotan may know that Siegfried is going to cause him to lose his temper. Wotan at one point says, just when the things are in the balance, and Siegfried's really starting to get on his nerve, he says, don't make me angry today. It could have disastrous effects on you and on me. And of course, the person that really would have disastrous effects on hardly on Siegfried, it's on himself. Although this is a disastrous effect, which is not really disastrous, it's necessary. I just think that Wotan is very conflicted, that he knows what has to happen, he's willed it himself that it should happen, but that doesn't mean necessarily that all of him wants it to happen. Wotan is, and this is the true nature of tragedy, this dilemma, this conflict. And what makes Wotan, I think, such an effective tragic figure and so eternally fascinating in a way is precisely because he is conflicted and because it's never entirely clear what Wotan could do if he wanted to and what he doesn't do because he knows he mustn't or shouldn't. That's what makes it very interesting is the idea of Wotan as the king of the gods. I think it's also very important not to underestimate or underemphasize in a production Wotan's power, because a great deal of the fascination of Wotan is precisely in to what extent Wotan knows that whatever power he may have, it ultimately has to go, that it's ultimately useless. But if Wotan is too obviously just simply a weak stooge, and this was my huge problem with the scene with Wotan and Alberich, because in the scene with Wotan and Alberich, as we saw, Alberich was clearly a far stronger person than Wotan. I mean, he's pushing him around, literally. I mean, he pushes him and he falls down and all this kind of stuff. And see, this is actually, Alberich should be afraid of Wotan, not Wotan afraid of Alberich. Not because Wotan is great, on the contrary. But see, if it's a little bit on the lines of if Othello was played as a raving lunatic from scene 1, act 1 well, he doesn't come in scene 1 of act 1, but from the first time we see him in the play, then his fall is much less interesting. Othello is not a good comparison to Wotan. He's not anything like as complex, nor is it anything like as complex a tragedy. But I think you understand what I'm getting at. That if Wotan is completely weak, no, on the contrary, the more at least superficial or ostensible power Wotan has, the more tragic and the more interesting his own necessity to fall is, and his own willing his own failure. At least that's how I see it. Let's go to a much more, and I think we're clear. Wotan's declaration to Alberich that he has come to watch, not to act, is a very somewhat dubious. He's acting, or he's certainly highly interested in what's going on, and certainly trying to at least indirectly affect the action.